Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Bleh, episode M. It's another entry into the History of Roadrunner record series, and in this one I'm having a conversation with Rob Beaton. Rob produced 3 Roadrunner albums in the early 90s, Heathen's Victims of Deception, Exhorder's The Law, and Defiance's Beyond Recognition. But he's also had a very illustrious career in mastering, so in this conversation we go through his time with Roadrunner, his time spending with the band, getting those records out the door, and then we spend a considerable amount of time talking about the mixing world and what it's like to master trailers and the loudness war. So if you're really into that kind of thing and you're not so fussed about the Roadrunner stuff, skip to about an hour in and you'll be blessed with all the wisdom and goodness that Rob has to offer in the technical world. So I hope you do enjoy this one, and thanks again to Rob for giving me his time. So 1, 2, fuck shit up. There we go. How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Nice to speak with you.
Yeah, you too. I'm just grinning like a child because I've just been prepping some questions, and I thought I'd talk a bit about the loudness war. And I thought, you know what? I heard a lot about Death Magnetic, the Metallica album when that came out. I'll see what that sounds like these days. And I saw some comparisons between as it was released in retail and then Guitar Hero 3 when they remixed it. I was like, fuck me, it's night and day. But we'll come to that. That's why I'm just like grinning like a child now, because since when I was a kid, when I got the album to now, I've done a bit more engineering stuff. So I'm like, whoa, I never would have spotted it at the time. Anyway.
Yeah, that was a big deal when that came out. I remember that. And the guy who mastered it, Ted Jensen,
Yep.
who's a legend, he took a lot of flack for that. And really it wasn't him. You know, those tracks were delivered to him just baked like that. So
we'll come
what's that?
We'll come to that.
Okay. Yeah. All right, man.
Good morning. Anyway, I know it's morning where you are. How was everything over in Cali?
Well, you know, a lot going on, obviously, here in the States and everywhere. It's good though. I mean, you know, COVID hasn't really messed me up too much personally, which I'm very grateful for that. I mean, I've been, you know, nothing's changed for me. I mean, I continue to work exactly the way I've been working for the last 15 years. You know, I've had a studio in my house and, you know, really during that time, and what I do today, I really specialize in mixing music for primarily movie trailers. Yeah. But it's what they call production library music. And so most of my clients are companies that create this music and composers who create it. And it seems we're all working from home spaces. So pre-COVID, rarely did anybody ever come over and sit in on mixes. It was all, you know, I mean, I even have the capability of streaming audio and video, so we could be in different locations and work as if we were in the same room, but nobody seems to really want to do that, you know, which is, you know, it's fine. I mean, so I'll, you know, when we get to that point where we're finalizing the mixes, you know, I'll address their notes. I'll send, I'll either upload to Dropbox or I'll send them a new file, and then I'll sit back and wait while they listen to it at their studio. Sometimes we're on FaceTime audio so we can, you know, talk during the process, but COVID hasn't really affected me. And on a personal level, you know, I have 3 kids who are all, they're grown and off doing their own thing. And they're still working too. So not, you know, none of them have been impacted. But I feel I've got so many friends who work in the live touring industry, you know, as techs, or I've got a buddy who's a big monitor engineer for folks like Enrique Iglesias, and this guy has not worked since, you know, the beginning of the year, and you know, that's his livelihood. I mean, he's missed multiple tours this year, so I really feel for those guys. But you know, I hear vaccines close, and you know, we'll see. I don't know, man. You know, my mom always told me as a kid, you know, one day at a time, and God damn it, if she isn't right. So
Yeah,
that's it, man.
I'm a live sound guy as well, but I've got another full-time job, so I'm fortunate enough to call it a side gig. But there's been obviously my network of people has been devastated. A lot of
Yeah.
them, like a lot of like what you might regard as sort of industry veterans on like the underground metal scene, particularly, who do the tours like with all those smaller bands who've been doing it for 20 years, have just gone, fuck it, I've got to get a call center job. I've got to be telemarketing or something like that, just to get some sort of security. And
Yeah.
it's just shit, but we'll get there. I mean, in terms of the pragmatism about it, I know Live Nation have been saying that they're developing a roadmap to getting shows back next summer. I think that's just fucking, they've got jack shit until there's a regulatory space that can back it. Live Nation are just trying to get their stakeholders happy, which is totally reasonable. But I'm trying to, my message is always be cautiously optimistic. You know, if the guy that's charging a $25 admin fee for tickets tells you that gigs are back next summer, you know, he's probably got an incentive to tell you that. Whereas the rest of the world's trying to take it, as we say, a day at a time. But
yeah, everything, not just concerts, but I mean, you know, sports. I don't know in England, football or soccer, are they playing in front of crowds?
You know, they started doing cardboard cutouts, so fans would send in their cardboard cutouts of themselves, and they're broadcasting it still on television, but you just get like the FIFA 2020 backgrounds effectively, because it's just cardboard cutouts. But that should be interesting, because this is the first year that Amazon Prime have taken over the Premier League in terms of broadcasting it, which is a massive deal, because it's usually Murdoch's empire that owns that space. And now it's going somewhere else, and there's no money being generated because, you know, there's no, all the ticketed events, anything they'd make off the actual ticketed events or the season pass holders or ticket holders, it's not gonna work. So
Yeah.
but I'm happy because I can watch Leeds United from where I'm sat.
Right. We've got, I mean, we're in the midst of the NFL football season right now, and some stadiums allow fans and some don't. So you'll see some games out, no fans in indoor stadiums. And then it just depends on what state you're in. And even when there are fans, it's limited to like, I believe it's 20% of the stadium's capacity. So they try and spread everybody out. So, and then of course, college football is going on right now. And that, I don't know what's going on with that. That's so crazy. I mean, there's some conferences have already started their season. Some aren't playing at all. Some started back in October or late or September actually, and are going to be able to put in almost a full season. So, I mean, it's just so messed up, man. It's so surreal. And like I said, I mean, I just what's going on tomorrow? What's going on tomorrow? Let's just get through that. And then the next thing, my wife and I went on a road trip about a month ago, doing some camping. And that's really all you can do, you know, at this point, if you want to break from everything. So her sister lives up in Eastern Washington, which is about a 20-hour drive for us. And so we just, you know, I rented a convertible Ford Mustang and filled it up with sleeping bags and tents and stuff. And we did that, and it was awesome, you know? So, that's probably going to be more of that on the agenda, I think.
Yeah. My partner is now 7 months pregnant, so that's off the cards for the time being.
Yeah. Okay. Well, congratulations, man. That's nice.
Thank you.
You're first, or you got second. All right. Awesome.
Yeah. The first will probably wander in at some point.
Yeah, no
and start shouting. But I'm getting some fluctuating light on my side. Is that bothering you?
No, I'm
fine. I'll leave it.
You look and sound great, man.
Awesome. So this project, thank you for the time, by the way. I know this is such a weird oddball request to get.
You know, it was kind of nice to get it. You know, those were hopefully the weed has not completely obliterated all my brain cells, and I'll be able to remember a lot of stuff. But those are actually good times, man. Those, particularly the Exhorder record, was you know, it was a very memorable time for me, and just have great memories about that, and loved those guys. Absolutely
Yeah, yeah.
loved them. I mean, they're just as crazy as hell, but like a lot of fun, man, and a really great band.
Yeah, well, let's start from the start then. So the project itself is just, instead of doing a band biography, a great amateur band biography, I thought I'd do Roadrunner. And then, because no one knows that story, it's all in the liner notes of greatest hits,
Right.
and you get Monty Connor doing the odd podcast, which is great, but no one really has like a linear narrative, and neither do I, because I've just been doing like 20 hours of interviews with people who lived through it. But I just thought, let's just tell that story before that knowledge starts leaving us, really, because Roadrunner as an entity, it's not a giant conglomerate. Or at the time, it wasn't a giant conglomerate. It was an indie label, and yet it still managed to have the impact it did. And I'm trying to suss out, music as an industry is not a natural vendor services rendered and consumed products in the same way that food or transport is. So how the hell did they manage to make such an impact on the industry? Was it an accident? Was it carefully designed? It seems like a bit of both, really. So I thought I'd try and tell that story, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about Roadrunner either, or Road Racer, like the distinction between the two. I don't really know, but I know it, and it'll get back to the joke I made to you earlier about Cease Wessels and King Diamond being one and the same. I mean, that I think sort of lends to the mystique of of the company and the label.
Yeah, and case of I think he's still around, and
Is that how you pronounce his name?
It's
Case?
it's still up for contention. There's
okay.
I call it a sister podcast called the Meep Meep podcast, Roadrunner Meep Meep, and he the guy on that, Ryan Rainbow, really cool dude. He's listening to all the albums from 1994, and talking about them with people or friends or whatever. And I haven't got to the episode yet, but apparently the Dresden Dolls have pretty reliable anecdotes pertaining to it being Sace.
Okay.
And I was speaking to Metal Mike the other day, Metal Mike of Aardschok magazine. He referred to him as Sace. Everyone else calls him Case. So I don't know. I don't know yet. I think we're all right calling him whatever, because that's what people have been doing for 40 years. So
right, exactly. And if anybody has seen the two of those guys in a room together, maybe you can track them down and get some confirmation.
Yeah, man. But for the meantime, you can't confirm it. Case is
right. Who knows?
So let's talk about your experience with Roadrunner. That in a nutshell, there were 3 albums which you produced in chronological order. I believe it was Heathen, Victim of Deception, Exhorder the Law, and then Beyond Recognition by Defiance. But prior to that, you hadn't done a lot of production work. You'd done a lot more technical work, I believe. So you were active in the industry. Were you attached to a studio, or was it just you freelancing?
No, at that time I was freelancing, but my backstory was I grew up in the Bay Area, and just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and I ended up getting a job at the record plant in Sausalito, which at that time there were 3 record plant studios. They were all owned by the same company, and they were in Los Angeles, New York, and Sausalito. And so just as I was coming in there, they were being sold. So it was being renamed the Plant Studios. Same exact place, just new owner, new name. And I was just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I had just graduated high school, and some buddies of mine had a band, and obviously I was very interested in this stuff. I mean, I think at age 13 or 14, when I got my first record, I was just instantly drawn towards, wow, how are these made? Who are the guys that make these records? What's the process? And from 13 or 14, this is what I wanted to do. The dream was to make records, produce records, engineer. I was very into the technical side of it. I was that kid who had the killer stereo system, and was always tinkering around with it. And so my buddies ended up over at the plant doing a demo. I tagged along, and I guess I made an impression. And a couple months later, I got a call asking if I'd like a job. And of course. And so I started there, you know, like most people do, as like the janitor. You know, I'm the guy that comes in the morning, cleans the studio, uh, does the lunch runs and stuff. But it was awesome, you know, because in the mornings, I would be in each studio by myself cleaning. I could see everything they were doing, see what kind of mics they were using, where they were putting them, how they were using them. And then when lunch rolled around, you know, the guys in the band and the producers love me because I'm getting their lunch, you know? And so you really get to know these guys, and a lot of them had an impression on me. So I was there for about 8 or 9 years, and then really got the itch to kind of do my own stuff. You know, I really wanted to produce bands and be involved more creatively. And so that's about where I was at when this stuff came up. And I mean, the story of the Heathen record is probably pretty interesting, I think, because originally a guy named Mark Senesac, who has produced Exodus and a number of other bands. But Mark and I actually grew up together in the same town and knew each other. Our mothers were good friends. And so Mark was tapped to produce that Heathen record, and he had already booked the studio time in Sausalito at another studio called Studio D. And then they were going to head up to Chico. Why, I don't really know, because Chico is about 4 hours north of San Francisco. It's really in the middle of nowhere, and it's a college town. But for some reason, he had found a studio up there, and he thought it would be a good idea to bring the band up there, maybe pull them away from distractions and stuff. So he was on another project and couldn't break away. So he called me up and he said, can you go to Studio D with these guys and just cut the drum track? See if you can get drums and bass. You'll be over there for a week. I'll be done with my thing, and then I'll take it from there. Right. And so that's what we did. And by the end of the week, the guys, Lee in particular, Lee Altus, they really liked me. And so they called Monty and said,
what year is this, by the way? Sorry.
This is 91, I'm going to say. 91. Okay. And Monty flipped out. I mean, he's like, who the fuck is this guy? Rob who? And, you know, he had hired Mark to produce this record. And, you know, Lee's a real smart guy. And he knows how to kind of get what he wants. And he just told Monty, said, don't worry about it. Trust me, this is going to be good. It's going to work out good. And next thing I know, I'm on my way up to Chico to do this record with them. And I'm co-producing this record with these guys. So that's how that came about. And in the end, Monty loved it. He just loved how it sounded. So the next record was Exhorder, and they were supposed to work with somebody else as well. Yeah. But Monty had kind of a change of heart. So he sent them the Heathen record to check out, and those guys really loved it too. And so they decided to bail on the other guy and asked me if I'd go to New Orleans and make that record. So that's, I just kind of like backed into this whole thing, to be honest with you. Prior to that, I was, you know, producing mostly demos and mostly pop bands and rock bands. It was the Heathen record that kind of pulled me into that whole thrash scene.
I was going to ask if you were a metal guy before, because especially on that Heathen album, it's like at the precipice of like the prog thrash or the thrash prog sort of wave, especially when Roadrunner was heralding those kind of albums like with Realm and with early Defiance, and it comes through in the mix because it's so guitar oriented, but at the same time there's such a reliance on everything else. You can't focus on just one thing, but it still sounds clean as hell. So I'm just wondering if you had like, was it just a sonic understanding of metal, or were you a metalhead prior to that engagement?
I don't know that I would say I was a metalhead. I mean, growing up, like, I loved Rush, absolutely loved Rush. But my favorite band, and to this day, they're still my favorite band, they're my Grateful Dead, is Blue Oyster Cult. The first record I ever got was On Your Feet or On Your Knees, and I was just instantly attracted to that. And then I discovered Agents of Fortune, and it was all over. And so, I mean, I loved them, but bands like Iron Maiden, UFO, Judas Priest, loved Judas Priest, and Metallica as well, Master of Puppets. I mean, I was listening to a lot of that stuff. So I think those things served me well on the Heathen record, because I think, you know, you hear a lot of those influences in their writing. Exhorder was a little bit different. Those guys were much heavier, and they were, you know, they were kind of, their scene was I think something that was a little unfamiliar to me. But I think that worked out well too.
Hardcore grounded.
Yes,
it's a bit
exactly.
more hardcore grounded in that, but there still had there was a thrash aesthetic, but there was also like some Cowboys from Hell comparisons as well.
Right.
In Kyle's voice, which I thought was a bit unfair, because I don't think it sounds anything. His voice sounds somewhat similar, as a rasp to it, but an Exhorder Pantera comparison isn't justified in any circle. I don't think they're too different.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that you can go back to like their association with Phil Anselmo, and even their locale, you know, being in New Orleans. But yeah, they were such a unique band. And it was definitely heavier than anything I had ever really listened to or even been into. But there were elements that I could really relate to. I mean, the groove, you know, they're always all about like just a great groove, and they had that. And I thought Kyle as a vocalist just absolutely mind blowing, and working with him was almost like working with a method actor. You know, he just really, you know, you just stay out of his way. I mean, when he gets into his headspace and prepares himself to perform, everybody just gets out of his way. And my job was just simply capture it, just capture what he's doing. You don't tell him what to do. You just try and facilitate him, you know, and then he comes out of it. I mean, it was really a strange and interesting thing for me to witness, because I had never really seen that in the studio. You know, there's, you know, it's more of a relaxed environment and stuff, but he just really gets into whatever you want to call it, his character or just the mindset that he needs to be in to perform. And it's almost as if he becomes another person. And then he comes back into the control room to listen, and you start to see, you know, hey, he's back. Kyle's back, you know.
Kyle said that, cause I spoke to him the other week. He said going into the studio for the Law, they obviously went in to try and capture the live sort of feeling. I guess that's the hardcore stuff speaking. But he said the thing that he felt let down on the Law was their lack of experience, because they got there's a $10,000 budget, which I don't know what that translates to in time, especially in 1991, 92. But he said we got there, and the two guitarists were trying to still figure out the tone and trying to figure out the gear they were going to use. And that kind of ate into the time. And then the knock-on effect was Kyle, I think, only had like 1 day to record all of his vocals.
Yeah, I do recall.
Does that sort of reflect on?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, the budgets for all of these records were small, in my opinion. They were tight. In fact, I mean, a little side story here about that was when I talking with the band about logistically how we're going to do this and whatnot, I agreed to instead of them getting me a hotel I think I was there for 3 weeks. Instead of me getting a hotel, they said, hey, we've got an extra room here at our house. You can just crash here. I was happy to do it. Cool. Then I got a phone call from Monty, and his exact words were pretty much, are you fucking crazy? You're going to stay with these guys? You're going to like live with them? And I didn't think anything of it. I thought, oh, they seem like good guys. I mean, this what's the problem? Plus, this is going to give us extra studio time. I mean, probably would have given us, you know, at least an extra 3 or 4, maybe even 5 days in the studio. And my mindset was that was the most important thing. I mean, with all of these records are, in my opinion, probably the most challenging records to make, just stylistically. I mean,
Yeah.
They're really, really challenging. I mean, everything wants to be the loudest thing in the mix, and it's a real, you got to work hard to make everything work, you know, make everything heard, and then you still have to, you know, make it all about the song, all about the performance, all about the, you know, the individual players. But so they take time, you know, it just takes time. So I always tried to, man, stretch that as far as I possibly could, because I knew that the more time you could put into it, the better you were going to be able to make it. So, you know, that was one of the things that we did there. But yeah, I do recall after we got kind of the drums going, you know, we did spend a lot of time trying to get the guitars together, and we also mixed that record twice. Originally, we recorded it in New Orleans at a, let me turn that off. Hang on a second.
It's all right. If you get an urgent call, by all means, take it. We're very laid back here at the Temple of Bleh.
Nothing is urgent here at all. But yeah, we recorded it at a place called South Lake, which was a great studio, awesome Neve console and a Studer 24-track machine. And then we mixed it back at the place in the Bay Area that I typically worked out of, and that was a place called Bayview Studios, which was just on the other side of the bay from San Francisco. And so the first go round, I talked Monty into dropping a little more cash so the whole band could come out for the mix. Oh, cool. And so they were all there. They stayed at my house as well. And we mixed the record with Vinny, really kind of driving the bus. And we handed it in, and I don't think those guys were really happy with it, and Monty wasn't happy with it. And I think for Vinny, I think he would even agree that it just felt kind of overwhelming for him. You know, that responsibility. I mean, it's not like he was sitting there mixing it himself. I mean, I was sitting there mixing it, but he was really kind of spearheading the direction. And so after some conversation, we decided that Jay would come out, and just Jay and I would remix the record. And that's the one that came out.
Right. It's interesting, the sort of chronology of Exhorder, because they were formed in 85. They had the Slaughter in the Vatican demo, and then Slaughter in the Vatican with Scott Burns. And that was like over maybe a 5-year period where they've got these songs. And then they've only got about 18 months and they've got a new album. So the songs themselves are stylistically different. There's a lot more crunch to it. There's a lot more groove to it, as we say, but it's not quite as thrashy. And there's even some slap bass in there and things like that. Did you get an impression that was a sort of a logical and natural progression for that band? Or did you think, okay, was there an incentive they were responding to? Was it just them jamming stuff out? Where did you think that change of pace sort of came from?
Well, it was definitely a conscious decision. They told me that before I even signed on to do it. So they sent me, because I didn't know anything about them, and this was, 1990 or 91. So I mean, you couldn't just email me an MP3. So they sent me Slaughter in the Vatican, and they didn't really tell me much about about their sound and their style. They just said, we'll send you this record. They sent it to me, and I remember opening it up and looking at that cover and going, oh my God, and then I listened to it, and I had reservations. And it's not like I'm some church going teetotaler, but this was like, wow, man. I mean, they're like dragging the Pope into a room and they're going to lynch the guy, And so I started thinking, do I want to do this? Am I up for this? And so I told Jay, who Jay and I really became kind of good friends on this project, and I really related to one another. He was the guy that really also had an interest in everything technical. I used to let him run the tape machine and punch in and out, on stuff. And so he called me up, and I told him, I'm like, yeah, man, I don't know, and this and that. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, let me have Kyle give you a call. And so Kyle called and he said, hey, we're going for something completely different this time. That was like something that we had to get out of our system. In New Orleans, religion is really big, and it's the only state in the union where they divide up their areas. We have counties in every other state, but in Louisiana, they're parishes, and it's all built around religion. And so this was, them, their backlash and resistance to religion. And so this time they were going to take on, big business and corporate and all that stuff. So it was definitely a conscious thing. They wanted to tighten up their sound, their performances. They wanted to continue to like push in sort of a very intricate and progressive direction, but they wanted it to be tight and clean. And then of course, as far as the lyrics, it was going to, there weren't going to be any religious connotations anymore. It was going to be about this. And so at that point I was like, yeah, man, let's totally do it. I'm way into it. And so it's funny, I've never really had a conversation with them about how the record is held up. I haven't talked to any of those guys actually in a long time, but I think that they were pretty happy with what we did, in the end.
I can confirm Kyle did say he was happy with he knows that Roadrunner weren't happy with the mix. He also knows it sometimes struggled to capture the live sound, but he was happy with the general what everything that happened in the studio. He was happy with your input. He was happy with everyone else's mixing input and everyone's performance. Have you heard the new album by any chance?
I did. I listened to a little bit and my mouth hit the floor, man. I mean, sonically, I was just stunned. I mean, I don't know who they're working with these days, but whoever that guy is, man, very, very impressive. I think he's some guy from Sweden or Norway, somewhere around there.
Vinny Labella, Dwayne Simoneo. I haven't heard of these two chaps.
Well, Vinny, the other guy I think replaced Jay. Replaced Jay Saravolo, and I don't know. I'm not sure what Jay's up to or where he's at. The last time my wife and I were in New Orleans, maybe in 90. I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years after I'd done the record, and we got together with the drummer Chris Nail and his wife, and that's really, other than just some messaging back and forth with Vinny, I haven't really kept in touch with those guys too much. But a friend of mine told me that they had a new album out, so I went and checked it out, and it just powerful as hell, man. The guitars are just massive sounding. Very well done, and just loved the mixing and loved the way it sounded.
Vinny was exec producing, and he's no longer
there. I
with the
think
band.
There's a guy. Does it list anyone as the mixer? Because I think I recall seeing it was a guy, and I believe he might be in Sweden, who mixed and mastered it.
Yeah, Jens Borden, Swedish record producer, mixer, and recording engineer. Accolades out the wazoo. It'll be too many to list.
Well, these guys today, with Pro Tools and all the technology that's available. I mean, honestly, I've been using Pro Tools now since probably about 96 or 97. So I don't know, that 25 years I've been using Pro Tools, and on many days, the thought will pop into my head, man, if I had this stuff back when I was making those records. I mean, it's like a game changer. Back then when we were cutting drum tracks, I mean, we were cutting everything to analog tape, and I was editing these drum performances together. Having, whether it was Chris from Exhorder or Darren Minter from Heathen, taking the best parts of multiple performances and physically with a razor blade and tape cutting these sections together. That's how we did it back then.
Yeah.
And now it's a completely different situation, recording to digitally in whether it's Pro Tools or Logic or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It's boy, it would have come in real handy back then. But that's how it was, man. And these guys had to perform, and it was painstaking work, to get those records to really sound great and to translate the ideas that are in their heads into what you hear coming out of the speakers.
Yeah, I think with those budgets that Roadrunner set as well, I think the expectation would have been you go in and you do it live and you get it right the first time. And it takes like a painstaking amount of time to get that to that level.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in my experience, and I think if you talk to like an Andy Sneap or some of these other guys, they'll probably say the same thing. The process is always, man, you just get the drum tracks, just get an awesome drum track that's killer. And then we used to do all the guitars next. And typically that would be, in the case of Heathen, Lee did pretty much all of the rhythm guitar stuff. And in Exhorder, Vinny did most of it, but I know Jay did a lot as well. And then you'd figure out where the room is left for the bass. You'd try and carve out, a bass sound that, really at best just complemented the guitars. And I mean, that's evident on the Heathen record. I mean, the bass is pretty much not even there,
Yeah. I was going to say on that, Josh Wilbur, he's a producer who's done a couple of albums this year. He did Trivium's What the Dead Men Say, if you've heard of them, and Lamb of God's new album. Mm-hmm. He, if I understand correctly, he does guitars first. He does them to click. And I think the idea behind that is when you get all the lads and the entire band in the studio, the last thing you want is them to be sat around for a week waiting for the drums. I think the idea is once you get the momentum going by getting as many people doing work as possible, then I think it's meant to pay dividends later down the line. So they just do it to a click. And then maybe if it needs tightening up, they can do it at the end because they've probably made time with everyone being on form and perform. Yeah, I think that's quite interesting to me.
I believe the Metallica stuff they did with Fleming Rasmussen was done the same way.
Okay.
I believe I've heard this multiple times, and I'm pretty sure that is the case, that James would lay down all the rhythm guitar stuff first, and that the drums, if not last, certainly later on in the process.
Yeah.
And I can see that too, because Lars's performance are really about sort of precision, and back then they would have been recording to tape as well, so would have been able to punch in and just build a drum track on top of that. So that doesn't really surprise me. I mean, these records are different than a Rolling Stones record. It's just stylistically that's kind of what it calls for. They're technically challenging, and they need to be tight and precise, and that kind of requires that brick by brick building mentality.
Yeah. So apart from rejecting the mix, did Roadrunner ever get involved throughout the process? I think Monty was sometimes rather hands-on.
In my case, on all three records, he was incredibly hands-off. In fact, with Exhorder, he was completely hands-off. I think those guys would have wanted to remix that record no matter what he said. I think even if he'd said he liked it, they were pretty set on wanting to do it again. They felt like it could be better, and it could be more of what they really wanted. With Heathen, he was pretty hands-off as well too. I think he really, really liked Lee and trusted him and believed in him. Defiance was a little different in that those guys, they didn't quite have the experience that the other two bands had, and I think their previous experiences with, I can't remember the guy that they had worked with on their previous records, but I don't think they came away from those experiences having learned a whole lot. And, I don't know. I think that was maybe a combination of him not the producer and maybe not pulling them into the experience, and maybe them not picking up enough through it. So I remember early on in rehearsals, you know, like trying to work out the songs with them, which is something I never really did with Exhorder. The rehearsal time was, I was only interested in really getting to know them as people, and getting a sense of maybe the best way that I can help them and facilitate them and help direct them, and then also to kind of learn the songs. But with Defiance is a little bit different. I was noticing problems that were going on, conflicts that were happening between the two guitar players that you know, were going to be problems down the road. So I had to reset them up in the rehearsal studio so that they could actually hear one another and begin to solve those problems. And then we ran into the issue with Steve, frankly, just not being ready to record. I mean, there were no lyrics. He really wasn't a participant in the rehearsals. And I brought it up with Monty, and, you know, it's like, what are we going to do here? So at one point, we had started recording the record not knowing what was going on with Steve. And so we ended up bringing in another guy. And at the time I had a small little 16-track studio in my house. So we were able to try out a couple different singers and actually demo them on top of some of the tracks we had.
Oh, okay.
And fortunately, Steve got it together, and he you know, he came back raring to go and ready to go, because I mean, that he's a powerful singer. He's a really great singer. And I'm really glad that you know, he came back around on this, because I can tell you the guys that we were working with, it was just no comparison. It just didn't sound good at all. And,
I was gonna say,
and it needed Steve, you know, it needed his powerful voice.
I was going to ask, actually, because I know one of those, I didn't know there was a number of singers. I knew Dave White from Heathen was one of those singers. And I was wondering, was that by your recommendation? Did you set that up, or just from your previous experience with him? But it could have been anything, like.
You know, I can't actually recall, because they knew those guys as well. I mean, it was a pretty tight circle there. There was another guy named Matt Ulrichsen. And I honestly can't remember where he came from either. I don't recall me personally bringing anyone in to try out, but I just remember, I think there were maybe 3 guys that we had tried, and we had them all come over to my house and sing on top of these, you know, rough tracks that we already had. And it was completely different. I mean, even Matt Ulrichsen was stylistically similar to like Dave White. Whereas Steve is, you know, maybe more of like a Chuck Billy, you know, kind of singer. So, you know, in the end, it really worked out. But that was one where, you know, I think it required Monty kind of stepping in and being involved and trying to help us sort this out. But on the other records, nothing. You know, he really let these guys do their thing and gave them the freedom to you know, make the records they wanted to make.
Just to fill any potential gaps in what your understanding was with Defiance. So on their first album, the producer was Jeff Waters of Annihilator.
Right. Okay.
That was generally a negative experience. Water under the bridge. So I'm not saying anything contentious here. I think what we'd kind of deduced was Jeff was brought on as a producer with the understanding that he'd be like the in-house Roadrunner thrash metal factory guy. And I think there was just, I don't think the band or Jeff maybe managed each other's expectations. So there was quite a lot of, we'll fucking sort it in post. And there was like all the guitars were really tinny and there wasn't a lot of tone to them. And the record went over budget and all that stuff, even though it's like a really well-revered record, product of society, the first Defiance record. I think that left a sour taste in Jeff's mouth and in the guy's mouth, really. So when they came to doing the second album, they worked with John Cooney-Bertie.
Yeah, John Cooney-Bertie.
I think that was a lot more straightforward. There wasn't a lot of contention there. But I think...
Well, I think, you know, part of the problem might have been that the fact that Jeff was the leader of his own band, a songwriter and a guitar player. And that was one of the things that those guys told me right from the get-go when we talked about working together, was they were like, we want to play our own instruments. And Mike Kaufman didn't play at all on that first record. And I think even some of the guitar parts might've been played by Jeff. So that was like a promise that I made to them, was, yeah, you guys will, sure, you're the bass player, dude. You should be playing on your record, So John Cunaberti, on the other hand, is more of a technical guy. I mean, he's now focusing on mastering. He's still up in San Francisco.
Oh, cool.
But John had a great career. He was Joe Satriani's producer for many years, and he's been around for a long time. He's a great mixer, great recording engineer. And so I think that was probably maybe a better experience for those guys, because he came more from the technical side, as opposed to like Jeff, who was like, man, I'm just going to replay your parts. This is how it should be, stepping all over, their thing. So, but I do remember them expressing to me that it was not a pleasant experience for them. So I wanted to try and make it that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I find it fascinating, because this is why I find Roadrunner so compelling, because I don't think Jeff was trying to be a producer. Maybe he was of his own initiative, but it came about the same time that Annihilator was signed to Roadrunner. So I think maybe Jeff was expressing himself to Monty, saying, can you get me behind a mixing desk? And Monty, who has been the cheerleader for Annihilator at that point for a few years, was like, fuck yes, we want to, if this is the direction the label wants to go, we want to be the thrash metal factory. Let's get this guy on board. And it just, I know that Jeff was also slated to produce Beneath the Remains by Sepultura straight after Product of Society, but he dropped out at the last minute and Scott Burns came in. So what I ended up with was not a thrash metal factory, but a death metal factory. And that's the shit that that's why I'm so fascinated. It's so dull cause I'm like, it's all about the bands and all about the music. And I'm there like, oh yeah, but they were trying to strategize and create a kind of movement. And I find that just absolutely fascinating. So on that sort of like line of thinking, the timings for your engagements with Roadrunner seems to sort of line up. Was there ever an expression from Roadrunner that they wanted you to be an in-house guy and they wanted to continue making records with you?
Well, I don't know about in-house, but yes, definitely. Monty wanted me to. Yeah, Monty wanted me to work with Deicide.
Cool.
And it was too far of a stretch for me, I think. I mean, it was stylistically, it was maybe just too far out of my comfort zone. The vocals, the speed of the tracks, and so I said no. That, if you got something that's more along the lines of Heathen, and the Metallica's Black album had come out during that time period, which I really, really loved. And in my mind, that was the kind of record that I really wanted to make for them, because I'm really a big fan of melody. And I mean, for lack of a better term, just sort of pop song structure, and that record really just sort of clicked on all cylinders, with that. It was heavy, it was melodic, it had groove, it had harmony, and I know Monty loved it too. We had a long phone conversation, just almost, just analyzing the record over the phone, and talking about how great it was. But sort of beyond that, I just didn't feel like I would really have anything to offer a band like Deicide. Sure. I mean, what they really needed was just somebody who could record them really, really well.
Yeah.
And, that just wasn't really something I was interested in at that time.
No, it makes sense. It's just fascinating to me that, especially at the time, as you say, the Black Album came out, Nevermind came out that year. So the Roadrunner themselves started diversifying massively. They started doing some electronica stuff. They started buying other labels and bringing stuff in-house to really try and tread the waters. They started doing that before those albums came out. So it was really proactive of them. So I always just like to think that there was a strategy. They weren't being reactive. They were being proactive. But for what it's worth, man, that Beyond Recognition record is bad. It's my favorite Defiance record because it's
oh, nice.
It does what other metal albums of the time didn't do, which was it actually embraced some of those 90s aesthetics. Like they embraced some of the Alice in Chains in there, and I even heard a little bit of Faith No More, and I think it really works. And it's still through line like prog thrash, and there's still the technical stuff there, and there's still like unnatural progressions, but it just seems to like it gives the music of the day a big hug instead of pushing it away.
Well, they were definitely influenced by those things that were going on at the time, because, you know, we had a long, you know, with the issue with Steve and trying to find another singer, there was a long period of time where we were frequently getting together and discussing the songs and what it needed. And so we were listening to Alice in Chains and listening to Nirvana and so those things do bleed on to the record. The guy in that band that just blew my mind was the drummer, Matt Vanderen. He made that project like really, really special, because that guy is just, he's incredible, man. And I think his groove is really what sort of propels those songs. And I, you know, still keep in touch with him today. He's living in New York, and he's actually the drummer in the Broadway play Wicked. So he's probably not working right now, but I mean, that like just tells you what kind of a drummer he is, how versatile he is, that he's doing that. And I also produced a band he was in a few years after that was really a straight up power pop band.
Oh, cool.
So really great drummer, great guy. And then of course, I know Doug Harrington passed away from cancer. That was a real drag too, but I really liked those guys. They were, it was a hard record to make. I mean, it really was. There were probably some things I could have done differently, maybe to make my life easier, but I really wanted to make sure that they enjoyed the experience, you know, and that meant, you know, you're playing on this record. Even if we've got to spend a bunch of time getting your parts dialed in, you're playing on this record, and just like trying to engage all the guys and have them all really be involved. And it, you know, in the end, I think it worked out pretty good. I remember I did some demos with them afterwards. I can't remember the name of the band. They had morphed into something different. Void Terra. No, that was an album they did. Can't remember the name of the band, but anyway, they had put something together with Dave White that I didn't go anywhere.
Skin Lab.
Skin Lab was the band that Steve went on to form. And I think they did pretty well. I think Skin Lab has had a pretty nice career since then. Not really sure what the rest of the guys in Defiance are doing though.
They've reformed. They had a fourth album in 2009, and they're currently sending emails to each other with new bits for songs for a fifth record at the minute. I'm trying to find that band which you were referring to, the because I know exactly what you mean, because because Mike was telling me they went Inner Threshold.
That's it.
That's it. Because they went back to Roadrunner. And Monty said, we're not in the business of signing over 30s, which was a fairly reasonable response for the label at the time. Yeah. So that was your last record for Roadrunner. Have you revisited metal a lot? I know you kind of like, you've gone into mastering a lot more than mixing records.
Yeah, I did for a few years after that. You know, I was still doing some indie records or demos. I did that first Torque record with Phil Demmel. Phil and I used to live very close to each other. We just lived a couple blocks away from one another, and Phil's an awesome guy, really great guy, just a heart of gold. And he had asked me if I wanted to do this Torque record with him, and that I had a blast doing that. That was a lot of fun. I think the drummer's name was Mark Hernandez, who was just another monster drummer. And I remember going into the first rehearsal, and he had taken like these metal discs and mounted them on his kick drum and the beater. So every time he hit the kick drum, it was like it had the body and beef of a kick drum, but it had this metallic, like a gunshot. And and he's playing it. And I'm just like, what? I'm listening to this going, what's going on? And I finally go around and I look and I see what's going on. And he looks up at me and he says, is this going to be a problem? I'm like, no, man, not at all, dude. If this is what you want to do, you know, it's, I try and embrace that kind of stuff, you know, because, you know, this is him, you know, trying to be unique and be different. And so I haven't listened to that in a long time. I think Phil had it remastered and re-released recently, but
on Mascot Records, yeah.
Yeah, but that was that was a fun project to do. But no, I mean, you know, let's see what happened after that. I ended up mid 90s, 96 or so. I ended up deciding to take a job as a staff producer and A&R guy for a label in the Bay Area called 911 Records. And
okay.
this was a company that had gotten a bunch of money from Intel, like $15 million. And their job was to create virtual bandwidth internet technology. And so they were, that was their chore, but they had decided to start this little record label and built an amazing studio in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And it didn't last long. These guys blew through that 15 million bucks in about 18 months, but they signed about 6 or 7 bands, a couple of them really, really good. And so that's what I did for about 2 years. And that would take us to like about 98. And then at that point, they went belly up, and I found myself out of a job and just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Do I want to go back to like freelancing in the Bay Area? But I had met a guy working on one of the records for 911. We worked together on one of the band's, one of the label's bands, and we really hit it off. And he was living in LA at the time and was doing a lot of television work, scoring TV shows, themes, things like that. So he said, well, why don't you come down to LA? And I'm like, well, you know, I got 3 kids. I mean, he's like, all right, well, why don't you commute down here and see how you like it? You can stay at my place. He had a studio in Venice. And so that's what I did. And I would fly down there during the week, and we would work together doing all kinds of crazy stuff, you know, whether it was, you know, scoring. We were scoring a show called Unsolved Mysteries, which was big here in the States. All right, so we did that for a while. We did the theme song for a big TV show here called The Practice, which was on the air for a while. So that was a real abstract piece of music with a trumpet player named John Hassel. So all of a sudden, I'm finding myself exposed to a whole new world, you know, music for TV, music for film. We started doing music for trailers then. We also did a record for that guy Buckethead, song, an album called Monsters and Robots. Pete and I produced half the record, and I think Les Claypool did the other half. So that was a wonderful experience. So that and after 2 years of commuting, I decided, you know what, this is a much better fit for me. Although I hated LA, absolutely hated living there, but I realized that I could go back to doing what I was doing in the Bay Area, or I could move down to LA where there's going to be more opportunity and you know, more of a challenge. And so that was in 2000, and I've been down here ever since. So, you know, it's funny you brought up the new Exhorder record, and I listened to it, and the first thing that pops into my head is, I could never do that today. I could never do that today. I mean, that thing sounds just absolutely insane. But I think part of it is that maybe I just, I'm not sure I got the legs to make that kind of record today. You know, I think I've settled into something that's just right for me. You know, the mixing process was really always my favorite from the very beginning, you know, and I was always thinking mix, even as we were recording the tracks, you know, in my head, I'm always thinking about how this is going to sound in the final mix. So it's always what I really wanted to do. And, you know, and to be able to do it here in my own house has just been an incredible luxury. So I stopped producing stuff easily 10 years ago. And and really engineering, I stopped engineering. I can't, last time I actually set up a microphone was probably 7 or 8 years ago. So, I mean, I'm pretty content doing what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, man, you mixed the trailer for my favorite Star Wars film, so
That's
awesome.
a great piece of music right there. That's my buddy Tom Geyer. Actually, this is his company, Brand X.
Cool.
See, so I get swag too. You know, it's one of the perks of working with these companies.
You get Kathleen Kennedy knocking on the door saying, "Rob, we need you. We've got another Star Wars to do." But that's interesting.
Yeah,
Just on that, it's interesting because that was what the I imagine it wasn't quite like another trailer, because there's mixing trailers and then there's one where the spec is, oh yeah, this is actually going to broadcast at the live stream of Star Wars Celebration. So the first time anyone's going to hear it or see it is on YouTube. So it's not going to be in the cinema. It's going to be on every device under the sun.
Well, for that particular one, I found out about it in the theater. I was in the theater and it came on and I'm like, damn, is that Galactic Soldiers? You know, and I'm what the hell? And I got out of the theater and I called Tom. I said, dude, did you know about this? They didn't find out until just a few days earlier. The trailer business is pretty different these days. Number one, and it's one of the reasons why I'm fortunately so busy, because there's so much demand for music, for trailers, because it's not just a theatrical release. You've got, like you just said, internet, you've got television. Now you can start breaking it up into demographics. Like they'll produce one trailer specifically for ESPN and Fox Sports, stuff like that, but then they'll produce a different type of trailer for the Home and Garden Network, you know? And so, whereas maybe it used to be 3 or 4 trailers were produced for different outlets, now it could be 20. Wow. You know?
That's crazy.
So, yeah, and that one was, they showed it in the theater. So that typically they'll call that the number 1 trailer. And then, you know, everything else, you know, will be for different, you know, different things. But yeah, and that was a case also where the piece of music was produced before the trailer. So basically they cut the trailer to that music as opposed to creating a custom piece of music for the trailer. That still goes on, especially for like big blockbuster movies where, you know, where someone will be commissioned to create a piece of music specifically for that trailer. But the majority of the time, the way it works is the companies that I work for create the content, and then they try and encourage the movie studios to use their music. So that'll be like relationships with editors and creative directors and producers and people like that. Exactly. And so, you know, once they decide, hey, we're going to use Galactic, you know, Cowboy or Galactic Soldier for Star Wars, then we'll deliver to them the final mix, but then we'll also give them the mix that's broken out into separate, you know, we call them stems. So that way they can contour the mix to their liking.
Whatever the audience is going to be for that outlet. Yeah.
Well,
how are you doing for time, by the way? I've taken an hour of your time. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, we're good.
Cool. Crack
on. So yeah, I mean, I think this kind of work suits me pretty well. I mean, I don't think I have I just don't think I have the energy or the focus to, like, you know, work with a band anymore. I mean, it that became pretty clear to me about 10 years ago. You know, I was like, man, you know, the hours are long, you know, and as much as I love hanging out with people, you know, it can be a challenge dealing with multiple personalities, you know.
Totally.
You've got to try and make 4 or 5 guys happy. And sometimes that's impossible. You know, you do your best and you try and, you know, you try and make that happen. But that's all you can really do. I mean, that for me, with any of these projects, whether it be the 3 that we've been talking about or any other band, always from the very beginning, for me, the most important thing was for me to kind of get to know the cast of characters,
Yeah.
and who's the guy that I can really sort of rely on. Which guys are, and I say allies because I don't want to make it seem like it's
Yeah.
confrontational, because that's like the last place you want to be when you're making a record with people, because it can be a real drag when there's a lot of tension and hostility going on. So always wanted to make it fun and lighthearted as much as possible. But within that cast of characters, I mean, there's going to be a guy who's the guy,
Yeah.
and he's the guy that
leader.
has the vision. He's the guy that can be your ally, that, will help you kind of push the project along in the right direction. And then usually there's always going to be a guy or two that are problematic,
Yeah.
So you just kind of want to suss it out and just manage people, And I look at my role making those 3 records, particularly with Heathen and Exhorder. People will ask, like, what does a producer do? And a producer can do a ton of different things, In the case of those 2 records, I felt like my role as a producer was really more of a facilitator. Those guys knew what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
They knew exactly what they wanted to have happen, and they knew in their heads what they wanted the final product to sound like. So I felt like it was my job to make that happen for them. And that involved finding the right environment.
Yeah.
Which, like in South Lake in New Orleans, I felt like was the perfect environment for them. And then just creating an atmosphere that allowed them to focus on what they wanted to do. And then, of course, capturing it. And I think on a musical level with Exhorder, certainly on a musical level, I had very little input on those tracks. Those guys knew exactly what they wanted to do. They were so well rehearsed, and things were so tight and so thought through. The Heathen record, a little bit different. I think I kind of pushed those guys a little bit more to experiment with a little more harmony.
Yeah.
Because it was funny. They were all, the Black Album came out after that, but they were already starting to do some of the elements that were in, that are on the Black Album. And I definitely embraced that stuff, because that was kind of where I came from, hooks and melody and harmony and stuff. But again, it was just back to, Lee had a strong concept of what he wanted to do. And of course, And Justice for All was the target for that record. That was, we want it to be better than that. We want to do that, but we want it to be better than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Around those times then, this should be an interesting segue. So where were the Loudness Wars at the time of these 3 records?
They didn't exist at all. In fact, a guy named Eddie Schreier mastered these records, a great mastering engineer.
Yeah.
We didn't master specifically for CD and specifically for vinyl. It was one master. So really, we were mastering really for vinyl. And then so 91, 92, it was, they were still pressing vinyl then. I don't know which sold more at that time, if there were more people buying the CD, but no, even if you listen to to any of those CDs, there's so much headroom on those records. I
was going to say, they all sound good on Spotify now.
Yeah. I'll have to go back and listen to these records. That'll be like a real, I may cringe. I don't know, but
nice. I don't think from when I'm reading on the Loudness Wars, because I'm kind of grade amateur. I'm a live sound engineer. I'm a grade amateur at that, but it's, when I read back on it, it seems to take place around about that time, maybe the mid 80s. But I've heard 2 sort of origin stories of it. So the Loudness Wars, the main sort of narrative appears to be anyone who has any sort of business interest in music, wants it to be louder than the next guy, and that's kind of like where we get this overly compressed and no dynamic ranging, and we get things like Death Magnetic where there's a lot of clipping and things like that, and that's your main story. James Dolby on a podcast with Chris Hardwick, I heard this about 3 or 4 years ago, said another aspect of this was cocaine. So the reason we got a load of remasters in the early 2000s is because when people are mixing on cocaine, you lose a lot of high end in your ears. Forget about the speakers, forget about the gear. So you're thinking you've got a great mix, but you've not got a great mix because you're on cocaine. So then once everyone sobers up and grows up and has kids and they stop doing cocaine, then they listen back and go, there's something missing here. And it's a little bit out of kilter. Is there any merit to that? Because I've got a friend who is actually a mastering engineer who says I'm full of shit.
Well, hey, look, first of all, mixing on coke, that'll certainly create some issues. You're typically you're mixing way too loud. I mean, way too loud. You just can't hear what's going on at that level. And yeah, of course, man, your ears are just getting tweaked. And look, I mean, I've been there too, So the loudness wars, I think, really came about, well, this is just my opinion, but I think one of the contributors was the multi-disc CD players where you could pop in like 5 different CDs into. It was an early version of our playlists today would have been that. And then you get back to A&R guys and marketing people in the record companies who want their track to get noticed. It used to be like when you would try and get your stuff played on the radio, what got it noticed was the fact that it was a great song.
Yeah, well,
Well, now, is it louder than everybody else's? If it's louder than everybody else's, then it sort of moves to the top of the pile. When Guns N' Roses Chinese Democracy came out, which that must be like 10 years ago now.
Well,
I remember Bob Ludwig mastered that record, and he delivered to them 2 different masters. One where he cut it hot and competitive with what was going on, the current climate. And then he cut another master that was very dynamic and one that he felt represented the music better. And he just sent it to them and wanted to get their reaction. Axl came back and said, the dynamic one is awesome. I love that one. And I think Bob made a little bit of a mistake. Who the fuck am I to say Bob Ludwig made a mistake? But he sort of announced to the world that the loudness wars are over, that, this Chinese Democracy, this album that people have been waiting 15 years for. Of course, we know what happened. The record came out and it was like nobody gave a shit, So, for Bob to say he sort of put all his apples in that basket, like just because this big Guns N' Roses record is a dynamic sounding record, the loudness wars are over. I mean, that was not the case, and I still hear it today, man. I listen to stuff and I'm just shaking my head like, this is insane. I would say, for every 10 new tracks that I listen to, there's maybe 2 or 3 that I feel like the overall loudness, the sheer loudness isn't impacting the music in a positive or negative way. The rest of them, most of the time, the loudness is just so overwhelming that I can't get past that to really take in the piece of music. And that's my own personal philosophy of this, because I have to deal with this too in the trailer world. It's very competitive. I mean, there are a lot of companies that are producing this trailer music, and it's got to be big and bold and powerful and punchy. And so some of that has to do with how loud it is, what kind of impact it has. So I have to play that game all the time, because I need to make sure that what I deliver to my clients is going to be able to compete with their competitors. So my philosophy is clear. It's first and foremost, it's about the music. It's always about the music. That's got to be just as good as it can possibly be. And then I'll start to address the issue of, well, is it loud enough to compete with everybody else out there, and try and get it to that level without degrading or tarnishing anything about the actual piece of music.
Did
And it's a
Inception,
challenge.
you did Inception like throw a spanner in the works? Because that entire hook with the Inception trailer set the bar for years to come. The wah, stop.
Yeah. Yep.
So then there's an expectation that your head's going to get blown off from the first note. Did that fuck you up for a few years?
No, not really. That was from a stylistic perspective, that everybody started doing that.
Yeah.
The trailer world's kind of interesting, it's trends and fashion,
Yeah.
Like a few years ago, it was all about these like really small, intimate, like close mic'd short strings, and almost like sort of Baroque type music.
Yeah.
So it, everybody, they call those Brahms, though that Inception sound, it actually has a name, Brahms,
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden people started integrating those into their music, and which is a crazy thing to do because it's so identifiable, there's you can't dress it up any other way, you can try and put other things around it, but at the end of the day, people are always going to go, oh, Inception,
Having said that though, does Rogue One apply to the Brom? Because it was higher, wasn't it? It was an alarm. It was the alien alarm from '79, but it wasn't Brom. It was more Brim.
That, I think that track would fit into sort of the more traditional trailer-esque type piece of music, where it's got a long shelf life, you know what I mean? It sort of transcends any trends. That's stylistically, that's a piece of music that 10 years prior you'd probably hear in a trailer, and you'll probably hear something very similar in another trailer this year, next year, the year after. So there's still a strong market for that, and it's technically we'd call it like an orchestral hybrid piece of music. It's built upon like an orchestra, but it's got electronica elements, synth elements that are weaved into it to create sort of this hybrid sound. So that's like one aspect of it. I mean, I do a lot of that kind of stuff, but then I'm working on something now that's very, very different. I don't even really know how to classify it. And really for the composer and the company that's making it, I'm not sure they know either. They just know that it's sort of different. It's unique sounding. And it has sort of a cinematic quality to it. So let's do it and throw it against the wall and see if it sticks,
Yeah, the one thing I hope we get out of in terms of trailers is the slowed down piano big theme. So like the Jurassic Park theme and all the retro themes that they just sort of bring back for the reboots. I hope we get rid of them at some point.
Yeah.
But, so how do we get out of the loudness wars then? What's the catalyst that's going to make people think, oh, let's prioritize dynamics over the boom?
That's a really, really good question, man. You also have to sort of factor in how people listen to their music today. I mean, you're probably like me. I mean, I've got downstairs, I've got a great setup down there. I listen to mostly vinyl. So that's how I absorb my music. But, you've got kids today who are listening with earbuds. That's or off their laptop or off of some little Bluetooth speaker, so it makes the job kind of challenging because you want to always think highest common denominator, but you also have to keep in mind that most people are listening, their listening environment is the lowest common denominator.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I think you hear a lot of tracks that are kind of loud and you hear the upper mids and the high end hyped up, because it translates a little bit better on those crappy Apple earbuds.
Yeah, definitely. I do the best to kind of make my household a Bose only household. That's my contribution to to the mixing world. I've got So go on.
Yeah, to kind of answer your question about how we get out of there, I'm going to have to say that I honestly don't know. I'm starting to hear a little bit of that in hip hop, believe it or not. Um, and it kind of makes sense because there's just so much low end in hip hop music that you really need that headroom to create that available space for it. But when I listen to a lot of the new hip hop stuff that's coming out, I'm like, wow, this sounds good, and you can really, really crank it up and it just doesn't seem to start blowing out. If I'd known you were going to ask me about that, I probably could have put together my short list of pet peeve tracks, because I've got them where it's like, I can't even listen to this because it's just so ridiculous how loud it is.
Hey man, email it over. I'd love to be able to do a comparison and sort of go, this is your token example. It's not Death Magnetic.
Yeah, the Death Magnetica, I'm not sure that I've heard a record since then that's been that loud or has been so problematic because it was that loud. I mean, that nowadays you can listen to some tracks and it, one person will say, doesn't bother me. And another person will say, it bothers me. But with Death Magnetic, I think there was a resounding universal feeling that, man, this is just wrong. It's
the snare. That's the main thing. Your gateway into being disgusted by it is the snare. It sounds like, how like SoundCloud rappers have like the trap snare, which is more of it just sounds like that, but it's not. You had snare problems on Saint Anger, and now you're completely inverting the problem and making it a signal problem, not an actual instrument problem. It was so strange. So strange.
Well, and my problem too, right from the get-go when I listened to that record, was I believe the first track opens up with just James playing like a clean electric guitar thing. And I was like, it was so loud. I'm thinking, what's going to happen when the rest of the band comes in, And then of course, when the rest of the band comes in, the track it's loud, but it just becomes small. And that's what happens when stuff is just overhyped and super compressed, is it just starts to sound small, and people don't realize that. And I have this conversation with a lot of composers from time to time, because sometimes they'll send me their tracks and their tracks have that baked into them, and I have to ask them to go back and take that stuff off and remake those stems for me, because there's not much I can do with it. You've effectively just completely crushed these things and sliced off all of the dynamics. And one thing I will tell to people is a telltale sign that something is just way over compressed is if it's a dynamic track that has like maybe a more intimate intro, or maybe the verses are smaller. Listen to the beginning of it and then jump ahead to the end. And if the beginning is louder than the end, you've got some problems. You've got to, and it stems from guys mixing with a bunch of stuff on their stereo bus from the very beginning. So you have a bunch of limiters, compressors, brick wall limiter or ozone, whatever these guys are using on their stereo bus, and it's on there from the very beginning, and you start mixing into it. And that's a huge, huge problem, because by the time you get to the end, you're just crushing the hell out of the track, So what I tell guys is mix your track with nothing on your stereo bus, absolutely nothing, and get it to sound dynamic. Make sure that contrast exists, between the light and the dark and the big and the small, and that the track dynamically grows when it should, go back and listen to classic tracks from the 70s, man. And that's what it's all about. It's all about that ebb and flow, big and guys are going to say, oh, it's so hard, man. It is. It's mixing. It's hard. You got to get in there, man. And you've got to you've got to ride those faders, and bring things up and down and whatnot. And then once you get a great sounding mix, if you want to hear what it's going to sound like after it's mastered, or if you're mastering it yourself, that's when you start to put those things on your stereo bus. But I still get so much of that from guys today, and I can like pull the file into Pro Tools, and even before I listen to it, I can see the waveforms and go, you know, gonna have to make a call or send out an email or something.
Yeah.
But the end of the loudness wars, I think, will only happen when people engage their taste and their musicality and their good. They start to embrace things like that, the dynamics and the track, just like, building, and growing and then breaking down again. I mean, we have to get back to that and make that really the most important thing, and make the loudness just something that's secondary.
Yeah, I mean, people respond to incentives, and it's probably a matter of, I best make this louder, I'll get the sack. And then once people are now, but if you get people to a point where it's like, I can't do this with pride, that's probably the state we need to be in before
Right.
none of that shit loudness filters to the top. That's, I guess, it's a more of a mentality thing. But I think you're right. You've got to mix yourself a landscape, and otherwise you're mixing yourself a box.
Yeah.
And as you say,
it's always got to be about the song. All your attention needs to be put into that. And, and then like my process, then it's like, okay, I'm going to start to make this louder, but I just don't ever want to lose the musicality that I've created.
Yeah, man.
If anything, I want to use this loudness to maybe accentuate that. So in my case, I'm always, and it's a little unusual because, especially in the record world, I'm starting to see more and more mixers master their own mixes, which I think is a great thing. But for old school guys, this is something that shouldn't happen. There's a lot of guys out there that still wholeheartedly believe that you have one guy mix it and you have one guy master it, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Obviously, I don't agree, because I've been mastering my own mixes for a long, long time now. But, I'm seeing guys like Andy Sneap masters his own mixes, the guy who did the new Exhorder. Yeah. And from my own personal experiences, I feel like who else would know better how the end result should sound than the guy that's mixing it, So it's something that I don't have to really concern myself with, but other guys do. The expectation of the band or the client. So if you're the mixer, you don't want to hand them this dynamic sounding mix, and now they're comparing their mix to whatever their new favorite CD is. Yeah. So invariably what they do is they throw some faux mastering stuff on it to try and make it louder, so that it's more of an equal comparison. But, unless you're using some really great gear, mastering can be pretty challenging. I mean, there's a lot of great plugins and stuff out there, but for me, it's all about this stuff. My mastering chain is virtually entirely made up of analog gear, and I really can't live without it. I mean, it gives me what I want, so that's a far cry from, a mixer. Like, all he's got is whatever, the Waves L1. So he's going to slap that on there, and he's going to just crank the threshold and make it louder. So yeah, it's tricky. In my case, though, I'm delivering mastered mixes to my clients. So, we've sort of eliminated that question mark of what the expectations should be.
You kind of segued onto my last three questions, if you've got the time. And it almost perfect segue. So if I was to start mastering today, what 3 plugins should I be looking out for?
Well, let's see. I have become a huge fan of the Plugin Alliance stuff. Okay. I don't know if you're familiar with that company. No. I believe they're a German company, Plugin Alliance. And I use a number of their stuff. They've got this Townhouse bus compressor, which is just fantastic on your stereo bus. They also have, what the hell is that thing called? Let's see. It is the the BrainWorks it's the Master Desk. BrainWorks Master Desk
Right.
is another one of theirs. Stephen Slate makes a good one called the FGX, which is a really great brick wall limiter. What I find in mastering, whether you're doing it in the box or you're using outboard analog gear, it's about finding a good chain of multiple things and not asking any one thing to do a lot.
Yeah.
But just asking each of these things to do just a little. And that's how I'm able to add a lot of gain to my tracks without having to over compress or over limit it, because I know going through all of this analog gear, I can make up, there's such high headroom with this gear, and a plugin, some plugins will function similarly, where I can make up a dB with like each piece of gear without asking it to do too much. So by the time I get to my final limiter, I've maybe made up 6 or 8 dB of gain. So I'm really not limiting the track that much at all. I'm just using something like the Waves L316, maybe just to for peak limiting and maybe just to make up a little bit of gain. So that's another good one as well. But EQ wise, the Plugin Alliance, there's an AMEC EQ 200, which is a mastering grade parametric EQ. I would use something like that. I would also consider using something like some tape emulation. In my case, I use the Universal Audio. They have an Ampex ATR 102 plugin, which is a tape machine that I'm very, very familiar with. I mean, that was, I had a 1/2-inch machine over at Bayview. So, all 3 records that we talked about were all mixed to a 1/2-inch Ampex tape machine. And the plugin is spectacular. It functions exactly the way the real machine does. So that'll be the first thing I'll use in my chain, and I'll send the mix to that. And it'll add some body, some warmth, some detail to it. And then from there, I'd probably use something like that AMEC 200 EQ. Then I would start looking at like that Townhouse bus compressor, or maybe even the SSL bus compressor. And I would start using each of those things to, little by little start to add a little bit more gain until I finally get to whatever's going to be the last thing in my chain, whether it be like the Slate, I said, the FGX, or the Waves, the L316, something like that. And that would be it. And that would be a chain that would probably work pretty well. There's also a, it's BrainWorks or Plugin Alliance. You can get it with Plugin Alliance, the subscription bundle, which, by the way, $15 a month. I mean, come on, for 85 plugins. And these guys continue to create new plugins. Like virtually every month, there's a new plugin that they add to the bundle. So this is for life, and they'll, since I've had it, which is the last maybe 10 months, they've added 4 new plugins. And it's not just crap that like, oh, here's another free plugin. It's like good usable stuff, So anybody who's like serious about this, the mixing mastering bundle with Plugin Alliance is the deal of the century. I mean, it's really incredible. Some great mastering grade plugins, but also just some plugins that you'll use constantly within a mix. But they make one called, it's the Digital V3, which is a phenomenal mastering grade EQ and MS processing plugin. And now a lot of plugins have this where you can actually expand the width of the mix, and used very judiciously, I will say that again, used very judiciously, can have an amazing impact on your mix. Being able to, this used to be something that was very difficult to do, to have to create an MS processing situation prior to these plugins. I'm trying to think how I even did it back in the day, man. It was really difficult. You'd have to sort of encode it and then decode it. And this was just, let's say you wanted to surgically do some EQ work, but only to information that's in the center of the track.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And not really affect what's going on the sides.
Mm-hmm.
That was a real bitch to do. Now it could not be any easier. This BrainWorks plugin, on one side, it's you've got a 4-band parametric EQ that focuses only on stuff in the center, and on the other side, same thing, 4-band parametric EQ, but only information on the sides. And it's been a real game changer for me, man. It's allowed me to do some unbelievable surgical repair work to some mixes that, I mean, I was shocked at what I was able to do. So it's great on that. On one hand, it's great for that, but as far as enhancing your mix, is phenomenal. I mean, say you take like the sides and just add, like just a dB at 10K, like a 10K shelf. What it does to your mix, you're like, wow, it just opens things up and just adds another level of detail and depth and space, space. So those are all awesome mastering tools. And all of those things I just mentioned are actually things that I also use in my mix. So those things will be on my stereo bus, except for the brick wall limiting. Those things will be on my stereo bus before I feed the track to my analog world.
This is the face of someone who's bitten off more than you could chew with that question.
Well, look, all I can say is
that's awesome.
Spend the $15 and you will not be disappointed. And then just get in there, man, and start using them. That's the best way to really learn how to use these plugins and really see what's under the hood. And one thing I will say also about Plugin Alliance that I find really helpful is the presets for most of their plugins are fantastic and really a great place to start, because some of them, the interfaces can look a little daunting, I mean, it's like, wow, it's like, where do I even begin, but you can go to the presets and click on one of those presets and you can kind of see on the interface what happens and then hear what it's doing. But I would recommend to anybody to spend the money on this Plugin Alliance. I'm a huge fan, and this is an endorsement from me only because I think it's awesome. I'm just like every other Joe out there, and I got to shell out my $15 a month for it, but I happily will do that.
Yeah. I might even cut that question and post it as like its own thing to like all the subreddits and stuff, because that's a gold mine of information.
Well, they've got a great Facebook user group too, which I don't go on Facebook anymore, but that's a whole nother story. But when I was, their user group is really, really great. And the guy that owns the company, his name's Dirk. He's always on there, man. And their customer support is great. And I used to see a lot of great things about the user group where somebody would chime in and say, hey, I just got this plugin and I'm not even sure where to start. And then, boom, there'll be like 20 posts from guys, who have some real genuine, helpful thoughts on the subject.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's all. I've just pulled up my list of plugins and I was like, oh yeah, I'm just trying to get the guitar to sound good. So it's all Dragonfly, Reverb, and Lancaster Audio stuff. But that's awesome, man. Which one should I do next? I'll do the silly one next. No context at all. Have you ever seen a ghost?
Have I ever seen a ghost? I'm going to have to say I don't think so. If I did, I wasn't really aware of it, Okay.
Cool. Of all the people I've spoken to, Kyle Thomas is the only one who's seen a ghost.
Kyle's seen a ghost, so that doesn't surprise me. I think probably seen a ghost. I don't know. If Vinny Labella had seen a ghost, he probably would have kicked its ass.
Yeah, I tell a lie. Metal Mike said every time he worked with Merciful Fate, weird shit would happen, like all kinds of like black magic weird shit. But that's it for my questions, man. You've been absolutely friggin' incredible. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
No, not really. But I love that you're doing this. I think you've taken on a really interesting subject because, Roadrunner is kind of an enigma, and I think Monty left. I believe they were bought by BMG or Universal Music.
It was Warner. There's
Okay.
so many interesting stories about like how it's a period of time referred to as the Red Wedding. Presumably the Game of Thrones analogy and Roadrunner being red. But all the personnel that worked there usually went off to go and do different things. They're all still like a same social group. Like I know Monty now works at Nuclear Blast with Mark Palmer, who was Roadrunner UK. A lot of people went off and did their own independent stuff because they knew at the end of that independent tenure, all the staff at Roadrunner knew what they were worth. And I want to track that. How did it get to that point?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think Monty left, like, I think once, if I understand correctly, I think once this acquisition was happening, he pretty much left. He had already made arrangements to leave. So that would have been like what, 2012 or something?
I think it was April 2012, and I think he was actually let go because it's no good having a 10 times platinum album 10 years ago. You had to have it last week, otherwise Warner don't give a shit.
Okay.
But it's not like he was gonna struggle to find work.
No.
No.
I mean, he's
I'm at the minute while I'm doing these interviews, I'm also like I'm going through Discogs on every record they've put out and gone, right, okay, who are they signing? What's different about this band? Is there a decision being made here? Are they trying to expand? Are they trying to do why? The big question is why. And this chapter, sort of like where you come in, is very much the Monty story of where they've got the first foothold, and then as you get through the 90s, then it becomes a different kind of. It becomes a different. He's still very much there, but I'm getting Mike Gitter in to start talking about metalcore and things like that. Howie Abrams was dealing with a lot of different things in the mid-90s, and it's just the cast of characters in that record label is just staggering, absolutely staggering.
And they had, I mean, that was sort of their niche, they had kind of carved out this thing that they were known for, and that's like that whole scene in Tampa, the bands in Europe that they were signing, the bands in the Bay Area that they were signing. And to my knowledge, I mean, I guess Metal Blade was still operating around then, but I don't really necessarily think of those two companies in competition with each other. I guess there's some overlap going on, but it kind of seems like they really had that market, they were known for it. And fans of that style of music kind of knew, like they didn't even have to know who the band was. If they saw the Roadrunner logo on there, to them, this was like something that I'm going to probably like.
I think the difference between Metal Blade, from what I can gather so far, and I haven't looked too much into Metal Blade, but I have got Brian Slagle's book. The difference between the two is Metal Blade's kind of built on a real sort of passion and a real loyalty from Brian, because he's so in tune with everything that he knew what was going to sell. Even if he'd make $1 on a band, he's like, well, it's definitely worth, if we're going to break even by $1, then it's worth me signing Satan and flying them around the world or doing whatever needs to be done. Whereas Roadrunner, I think, Case built a very antiquated business model. He ran it like he would run a label in the 70s and 60s, but he surrounded himself with experts in a niche. I mean, at the time that Roadrunner came out, it was Satanic Panic. So there's antagonists over there, and there was a lot to draw from. And I think that's one of the reasons it is the way it is. He just managed to find the experts and the people who gave a shit.
And passionate people. I mean, Monty is incredibly passionate about music, and the bands that I worked with, I mean, he really genuinely loved their music. And I'm not sure you can really say that exists completely like at a lot of other labels, especially big labels. I mean, a lot of times these people, all they're really thinking about is the bottom line. Is this going to sell? I mean, the mentality these days when I was growing up, man, you'd see bands were given an opportunity to grow and develop. Nowadays, man, if you don't have a hit like right out of the gate, you're gone. And I just think about like all of the great bands that could have been that never were, because they never got an opportunity to grow and discover their sound, you know.
Yeah.
You know, I think back to like some of my favorite bands like Cheap Trick, and you could even put Rush into that category, man. Like a band like Rush today would never stand a chance ever, you know. But you know, here's a band that got an opportunity to do what they wanted to do and really develop and evolve and have success. You know, I think the Chili Peppers were another band like that, where it took them 3 or 4 records before they were really discovered and they had some mainstream success.
But in this process, I am empathizing with the labels a lot more, because it's so far removed from our infrastructure as human beings to try and make money off these things. It has to be for the love of making the metal happen. So at the same time, I'm like, we really wanted Realm to develop and be this huge band, but if they can't sell records, we can't invest in it. And if we can't invest in it, or even if we do invest in it in a depreciating product, we're going to be out of jobs. And if we're out of jobs, we can't make metal happen.
Right.
And I think that is a perspective that musicians don't know about, and I think people in general don't know about. They see the guy behind the desk with the cigar, and they see the turnaround in the big labels where you don't have a job for more than 3 months, because again, it's that bottom line, like you said. And I think if people understood that more, I think you'd have a much better working relationship with labels and what they do and what service they do provide to the industry and to the scene. And then bands can help accommodate that and communicate more effectively. That's what I've learned so far anyway.
Well, I mean, that relationship between the artist and the record company has always been, you know, a difficult one, you know, and at times fractured. And, you know, I mean, the old story used to be like, you know, this would be all, of course, be pre-streaming and pre-internet and whatnot. But, you know, that a typical major record label, for every 30 acts, 29 would lose money, but that one was so big it would pay for everything else, you know. And nowadays, I mean, the typical record label would be what they call a 360 deal, where the label gets a piece of everything, and that everything predominantly would be touring. And with no touring going on, you know, that's a huge stream of revenue. That was like something that touring revenue would give a major label more incentive to sign a band and take a chance on a band, because they knew that if the band can have any success out on the road, that at least they can sort of, you know, mitigate some of the expenses that way. But with no touring going on right now, and who buys records? You know, I still scratch my head and I'm thinking, well, how's anybody making any money? You know?
Yeah, I mean,
I pay $15 a month for Spotify, and I'm happy to do it. But where does that money go? Who gets it? I don't know. It's like some magic formula.
It's interesting that you mentioned the 360 deal, especially in the pandemic, because I'm trying to figure out how does it relate to streaming performances like on Twitch, because you have a lot of Twitch musicians who play their own music, but technically they don't own their own music. So if I donate $5 to Matt Hayfie playing a Trivium song, in theory, he should get that $5, but then Roadrunner might come in and go, actually, that belongs to Warner Brothers, and trying to figure that out.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's quite interesting.
And well, I guess Bandcamp is another one too, where you can, you know, really sort of support the artist. I mean, I don't know. I don't, I have a Spotify account. I use it, quite a bit, you know, and I guess, you know, I haven't really done anything. It's like, I want to pay the artist. I'm one of those guys where, man, I want to make sure that the artist gets the money. I just don't know really how to do more than subscribe to Spotify. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people probably feel the same way. And I mean, there are people who go to Bandcamp and do that, but I don't ingest that much music like that. I mean, dude, for me, like, I'll sit downstairs and I'll listen to my records, you know? So I don't know. I guess the artist already got paid, you know, because I bought the record. So it's tricky, man. It's, you know, it makes me kind of glad that I'm doing what I'm doing now. You know, I don't really have those headaches.
I should have asked this question before. Were you on the royalty system for those 3 albums, or were you paid by the hour?
No, I did. I got a flat fee to do all 3 records. And royalty was offered to me on the Exhorder record. And I decided not to take it. It was either, hey, you can have X amount of dollars and no royalty, or you can, have a little less of a production fee and we'll give you a point. And I chose, I mean, my thinking was like, this isn't going to sell 1 million records, So I went that route, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether that was a good idea or a bad idea. It's just what it was.
Yeah. I think
I get on some of the trailer stuff. I have relationships with some of my clients. So they will, in lieu of any royalty, they will give me a percentage of the composer's share. So I'm a BMI writer. I mean, I'm affiliated with BMI, so I get small royalty checks for stuff every once in a while. But for the most part, I'm a work for hire guy.
Cool. Well, that about wraps it up, man. I think my kid's gonna go to bed.
Dude, this was a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you reaching out. I mean, I haven't talked about this stuff in forever, if ever. So
it's yeah. I mean, like I say, you're part of the cast and characters of that journey that label took. I mean, you were almost part of the Thrash factory. Yeah.
Almost, man. Almost. And I came out the other side intact. So that was good. But hey, if you ever talk to any of the guys that I had worked with, please tell them I said hello. And
I will do.
I'd love to hear from them. I mean, I'm easy to find on the internet. So I'd love to hear what these guys are up to.
I'll let them know.
Awesome.
Just for your information on this bit. So first thing I do as a commit a carnal sin is I take the MP3 from this, or the WAV, and I throw it into fixmylevels.com in case that our inputs are out of match. Instead of spending hours on Audacity mixing it, I just throw it onto there and it processes it. But I'll edit this straight away and I'll send it straight out, and I'll direct all the traffic to your website and tag you on. Are you on Twitter or anything? I know you're not on Facebook.
No, Facebook. No, really, my website is really the only thing.
Cool. And your Spotify,
awesome.
So you can get pennies for the thousands of streams that you're going to get.
Yeah, we'll see, but I will have to sit down and listen to the law, and just really a blast from the past, or actually the Heathen record too. I actually have the Heathen on vinyl, so that would probably be the thing to do, is to pull that out and have a listen. But man, it was really nice to just kind of reminisce about this stuff. I haven't thought about this stuff in a long time, and like I said, I mean, those were good times. I had a really good time with these guys, and a lot of great memories, and just a lot of fun. Yeah,
man. And the sound consistent, not to keep bringing up the mixes and stuff, but it was a job well done. I know you didn't expect to hear that 30 years from then, but yeah.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that.
No, I appreciate your time. It was nearly an hour 50, and I said an hour, so I've completely drained all knowledge from you, I think, and probably all your energy and willpower.
No. I've got a new track sitting right there, so I'm gonna probably finish my coffee, maybe smoke a little joint, and dive into my next track here. So
sweet, man. All right, well, thanks very much for your time. I'll let you know when it's open. I'll get everyone. I'll keep in touch about how it's all going.
Please do, man. Keep in touch, and I'd love to see how this thing progresses and check it out. But it was really great speaking with you, man.
Yeah, you too, Rob. All the best, mate.
All right.